Hello everyone, it's Charles Watts here from Goal, back again to do one of these videos. It's been a while now since my last one. A little bit of a different one today. Recently I've been doing sort of Q&A type things, and I will do that one again. I'll do one of those next week, I promise. But for today I'll just come on, just sort of run through a little bit about what's going on at Arsenal at the moment, and sort of talk a little bit about transfers and the possible transfer window in the summer, and talk about some comments that Mikel Arteta has just made today, talking to Sky Sports. It's given a bit of an interview to them from his house. So we'll just sort of go over that and talk about some of his comments really, and what it could mean in terms of the summer, and what Arsenal might want to do in terms of the transfer window. Just first of all, just start off saying what Arsenal are up to at the moment. Not much, like the rest of us. They are sitting at home, still training, still going through their sort of personal routines that have been given to them by the club, but still at home, not at London Colney, and they're not going to be back at the training base for a fair while yet. I mean, we're at the beginning of April at the moment. I think certainly you're looking at some point in May they might head back there, initially start training in little groups. That's the plan at the moment. Kind of like you've probably seen over in Germany, the teams are headed back over in Germany to start training. Bayern Munich did it earlier this week, and you saw pictures of them training in groups of sort of 3 and 4, and I imagine that's what Arsenal will be doing. That's certainly the plan at the moment, how they see themselves initially getting back and trying to work on their fitness ahead of the season resuming, whenever that may be. Probably June. I think that's sort of what the plan that the Premier League are working towards. The Football League is certainly working towards that as well, possibly getting things done by the end of July, and then having a little break before the new season starts, and somehow fitting a transfer window in the middle of all of that. So yeah, at the moment all quiet, but when it does come back, and it will come back, then it's going to be jam-packed with football. Pretty much every other day there's going to be matches, so going to be plenty of us to watch, and get sort of delve into when it does all come back. But at the moment we're all doing this, sitting in your houses, looking out the window longingly, wishing you could go down a pub and do all of that, but not to be at the moment. We've got to all do our bit, stay in and get on top of this horrible virus. And if any of you watching are sort of NHS workers or key workers who are right in the front line of all this, as everyone has already done, just want to pay my heartfelt thanks to you all for what you're doing and what you're continuing to do and what you're going through to help us get on top of this horrible virus and get back to some sense of normality at some point in the future, whenever that may be. So let's get into it. Let's talk about transfers, shall we? It's always an interesting topic. It's a little bit of a difficult one at the moment, because given what is going on, transfers really is should be at the back of everyone's minds. I know we all get sort of caught up in it at times, certainly in the summer when the transfer fever kicks in and everyone wants to know who you're going to sign. There's rumours flying around all over the place, and it kind of feels a little bit wrong to speculate and talk about potential transfers and millions of pounds being spent, where at the moment people are struggling to get cash together to live because they've lost their jobs or been furloughed, like so many people have. But I thought I'd talk about this subject anyway, just given what Mikel Arteta has said. And if you haven't seen it already, I'll read out a few quotes. I've got them here in front of me, talking to Sky Sports today. Mikel Arteta has sort of spoke about what Arsenal could do possibly in the transfer window, given what's going on, given the circumstances behind it, where Arsenal were in the league when the suspension happened, the financial issues that the suspension because of the coronavirus pandemic is causing, not just Arsenal but all football clubs. He's been talking about that, and he says, as I said, talking to Sky Sports, says, I'm planning 2 or 3 scenarios that we can face. Depending on one of those 3, we will be able to do more, less or nothing. We have to react daily. We don't know what the financial situation is going to be. We don't know the rules, the timing, the window. There are so many things we cannot control at the moment. And that is very true from Arteta. It's totally out of Arsenal's hands at the moment in terms of when the window is, what the rules are going to be, when things can be done. That's what FIFA are trying to work out at the moment. But in terms of Arsenal, this is going to hit them pretty hard, the whole suspension of football, and financially the impact that it's having on clubs, because Arsenal weren't in a good financial position going into this. They just announced losses about a month before for the season 2018-2019. That's the first time the club had an operating loss for about 20 years. They're not in a good position, and that comes from the fact that they've gone 3 years without Champions League football, and the club the whole business model is centred around Champions League income. They've got a Champions League wage bill, but they haven't got Champions League football. And for one season, they could just about cope with that, but they've been 3 seasons without it now, 3 seasons in Europa League. And that all added up to that loss that was announced for around 20 odd million quid, or more than 20 million quid about a month ago. And that's with the run to the Europa League final last year factored in, and Arsenal earned a decent amount of money, not Champions League money, but still a decent amount of money out of that run. Obviously, this year they got knocked out in the round of 32. They're not going to make anywhere near that sort of cash. About 20 million, I think they're going to make from it this year. And so financially, it's going to look even worse for Arsenal because they've still got that wage bill that they haven't been able to really deal with yet. And that puts them in a difficult position, especially with what's going on now. And so in terms of the transfer window, they're not going to have, the budget is not going to be there to do much. And it's difficult for Arsenal to really plan at the moment because they don't know, they can't really work out the budget because they don't know if they're even going to be in European competition next season whenever it does start, because at the moment they're 9th in the Premier League, obviously outside of the European places, but they're within touching distance of 5th place, which could be enough for a Champions League spot. So it's all up in the air, and I think that's what Arteta's talking about here, you know, when he says that there's 3 scenarios, we'll be able to do more, less or nothing. The more, you think that's if they get in the Champions League. The less is if they've got another year in the Europa League. The nothing is if they don't make it into Europe and have to have a year without any sort of finances from European football. And that's a real problem for Arsenal because they need to rebuild. They want to rebuild. Arteta certainly wants to rebuild, but he needs funds to do that. And as we all know, Stan Kroenke won't put his own money in, and the club operates by a sort of self-sustainable model, always has done, and that's not going to change. And you know, Stan Kroenke is going to be hit by this whole suspension of sports worldwide more than anyone because of his interests and his franchises over in America. Obviously, there's no NFL, there's no NBA, and there's no Premier League, and he's also got his huge multi-billion-dollar stadium being built over in Inglewood for the LA Rams to play in, and that's all obviously at the moment in a worrying situation as well because of basically the worldwide shutdown. So Kroenke, I know no one's going to shed any tears over that, but Kroenke will certainly be feeling the pinch right now, and he's not going to be ploughing a load of his own money into Arsenal in the summer. Far from it. So if they don't get any European football, then they're not going to have any real funds to spend unless obviously they sell players, which they could do. But even then, you've got to look at they could be selling players just to offset the operating loss that they had last year. And so yeah, it's not financially, it's not great for Arsenal, and that's what Mikel Arteta's, you know, he's been honest there, and you know, fair play to him for that. He's not hiding behind anything. He's not preparing fans for any sort of false hope. He's saying that, you know, there is a chance that we might not be able to do much at all in the transfer window. But I think for Arsenal, the big thing is that if they get Champions League football, and they certainly could get Champions League football, even though it's going to be difficult, then they're going to have plenty of money to spend. If they get Europa League football, then you're going to have probably, I'd say around 30 million, but they only had about 30 million last year, remember, to spend, and they did it really well. They got the big Pepe deal in there, which was structured over 5 years, so they didn't have to spend much of that. You know, they didn't have to shell out a load of money on Pepe because they had it structured in, and they got a good deal with that one. But they also, you know, moved money around a little bit. They sold a few. They brought players in, and they didn't actually spend that much money. And there is, I think, you're looking at 2 players for me that if Arsenal want to generate funds this summer, it could be 2 players they might look to move on. Lucas Torreira is one of them. I don't want them to. I really like Torreira. I think he's a really good player. You know, his impact when he initially came in was fantastic. But there's no hiding behind the fact that Emery, even Lundberg, and now Arteta, that, you know, he's not a first choice starter. There's some games he'll play, but he's not a first choice starter. You look at Arteta before this suspension, he turned to Dani Ceballos and Granit Xhaka as his sort of midfield to Emery certainly preferred sort of Guendouzi and Xhaka by the end of his stay. And I think Torreira, I don't think he's ever really settled in London. He's enjoying it at Arsenal, no doubt about that, but I do think a return to Italy could suit Lucas Torreira, and I wouldn't surprise me if he pushes towards that in the summer. There's talk about Napoli, there's talk about Milan, there's Italian clubs certainly looking at Torreira. He was obviously very, very good at Sampdoria before he arrived at Arsenal. And yeah, I do wonder that if a decent bid comes in for him, then Arsenal might look to see if that's an area where they could get some money into it to spend elsewhere. Obviously, they've got the Dani Ceballos situation. He's going to be heading back to Madrid. I'd be very surprised if Arsenal make that Dani Ceballos transfer permanent. A, it'd be a lot of money. B, I'm still, although he's played pretty well under Arteta, I'm still not convinced about him in the Premier League. I'm not quite sure he's got the pace to cope with it. Although I think he's done well, but yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised if he moves on, and that will leave a big hole when you've got Torreira going as well, possibly. But Arsenal's one of their priorities this transfer window is a box-to-box midfielder. They've never really replaced Aaron Ramsey, and they're going to look to do that this summer. That's certainly been the plan. That's one of their key target areas anyway. It's centre-back, centre midfield, box-to-box, a right-back, and potentially a forward. And I think that forward may well happen because this situation is going to be really difficult in terms of the suspension and the late return. It's going to be difficult in terms of Aubameyang because Aubameyang's only got coming up to a year left in his contract, and if the season runs through until the end of July, then Aubameyang's already going to be well into that final year by the time the season finishes and by the time the transfer window opens, and that's going to hurt Arsenal even more because if they are forced to sell and they don't want to, Arteta's already said he doesn't want to. He said in a press conference before the break, I want to keep Aubameyang at all costs. Not surprising given Auba's fantastic goal scoring record, and Arteta would be desperate to keep hold of him, but ultimately it's a club's decision, and if a decent offer comes in for him, then Arsenal might have to sell, given he's only got a year left and he's possibly indicated that he's not going to sign a new contract. But there's value, given he'll be well into the final year of his contract now. When the transfer window does open, his value is going to be really, really minimal, and that's going to hurt Arsenal a lot because if they were looking at possibly selling to buy, you'd think that Auba might have been in that category because of his contract situation. But if they're only getting really small offers in, then you almost think what's worth is it really worth it, or would it be better off keeping Aubameyang, having that pretty much guaranteed goal supply for another season, and then letting it go on a free, because with Aubameyang they've got a much better chance next season of qualifying for Champions League or at least the Europa League. So there's something that Arsenal are going to have to weigh up, I think, in terms of that, and it's just another situation that this whole suspension has caused that isn't a good one for Arsenal. I think they're being hit more than a lot of other clubs by this suspension and the financial implications that come from it. I do think though as well that Alexander Lacazette could be the guy that they sell. They could keep hold of Auba and look to move on Lacazette. He's obviously got 2 years left on his contract. Atletico Madrid have always been interested in him. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they come back in with another move this summer. And yeah, we've seen that Arteta has already been preferring Eddie Nketiah to Lacazette before the break. So if a decent bid comes in for Lacazette, I think he's certainly one of the members of the squad that you look at that you think if Arsenal do need to raise funds, he could well be one of the better options for it. So it all adds up to just going to be an interesting window for Arsenal. A difficult one, but one if they do operate wisely in the market, they still could do some good things out of it. You've got to remember they got William Saliba coming in, and that is going to be a right bonus for them now. You kind of forget about Saliba because that deal was done last summer, but the fact that they've got this really strong, impressive centre-back who everyone that I've spoken to has said nothing but good things about him. The fact that they've got him, he's coming in this summer, before this all starts, before the window all kicks off, they've got one guaranteed new arrival coming in who you'd hope can hit the ground running even though he's young. That's going to be a big bonus for Arsenal. And they've also got the options with Cedric Suarez and Pablo Mari as well, who then, if they are taking up those options, then you've got a 6-month almost bedding in period for them where they can adjust to new surroundings, get used to their teammates, get used to the style of play. I think Mari, there's a good opportunity there for Arsenal. I think they like him. Arteta likes him. He likes the left-sided centre-back, and if he does impress in training and in the final games, whenever they are played, he's not going to cost an awful lot of money, and that will certainly fit into whatever budget Arsenal have got. So you could well be looking at 2 centre-backs there pretty much already done in Mari and Saliba, and then you just focused on the right back, which could be Suarez if he impresses as well, and he's a free transfer, which will certainly fit in. Kurzawa is another option Arsenal look at. I know he's a left back, and you think Arsenal are well stocked with that, but Kolasinac is another guy they could potentially look to move on. Kurzawa at PSG, Arsenal are looking at him. I think Kia Drabchin's his agent, and Kia obviously is a big sway in Arsenal's transfer dealings now. And that could be another one in terms you look at bringing in a player for free, potentially selling Kolasinac for a bit of money. That's how Arsenal are going to have to operate. So that's a look at the transfer window. That's how Arsenal are going to have to work in this transfer window for me. And they could do that. Then you got relatively cheap additions to the defence there in Kurzawa, Suarez, Mari, Saliba. And then you can sort of focus on those key areas, certainly the box-to-box midfielder, which Arsenal really want to do. Thomas Partey at Atletico Madrid is a player they really, really like. Been some sort of discussions last year about him, didn't happen. It could well move. He's got a release clause, but it's going to be expensive. And I think that's, again, you're looking at what Arteta said there and his planning for his different scenarios. I think Thomas Partey is your best case scenario. That's Champions League football. Finishing position type scenario. Then they could maybe convince him to come over from Atletico Madrid, and they could afford I think it's 50 million release fee for him. If not, they're going to have to go looking elsewhere and trying to use the scouting network to bring in midfielders who could possibly replace Aaron Ramsey. And that scouting network is going to be key. If you haven't got that much money, you got to scout well. They did that last summer with Martinelli. They did that the summer before with Guendouzi. They're going to need to do that again this summer. And then looking at the attacking options. If either Laka or Aubameyang is sold, they like Jonathan David. Genk, the Belgium striker, he'll cost about 20-25 million. Edouard at Celtic's another player they're looking at. So there are options there for Arsenal, but as Arteta said, and I'll just give those quotes again before I leave, in case you missed them, I'm planning 2 or 3 different scenarios that we face. Depending on one of the 3, we'll do more, less, or nothing. We have to react daily. We don't know what the financial situation is going to be. We don't know the rules, the timing of the window. There are so many things we cannot control at the moment. That's what Mikel Arteta had to say about the transfer window, and I hope I've sort of given you a little bit of information about what might be to come and the situations facing Arsenal potentially going into that summer window, and what this suspension and the coronavirus pandemic is doing to that and the problems it's causing, and how Arsenal might look to resolve it. So I hope I've cleared things up a little bit. As always, please do reply to this with any questions you may have, and if you haven't yet, please hit subscribe button right down there in the bottom somewhere if you haven't subscribed yet. And I do appreciate all the support you've given me on YouTube in the sort of 6 weeks I've had this up and running. And hopefully once football's back, I'll be doing awful lot more videos from a lot more glamorous places than my bedroom. So until then, please do keep yourself safe and your family safe. I hope you get through these next 7 days or so without going too crazy, being cooped up in your houses, wherever you are. But please do stay safe. And once again, thank you for the support.